how many people need to vote for you to die for you to say, you know what, I deserve to die? How many people need to make the choice and follow up on that choice to kill you before you say, you know what, I don't deserve to live, I shouldn't defend yourself? Is morality democratic? In the next 30 minutes, we're going to try to answer these questions and more. Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, said something, and as often happens when he says stuff, it is making headlines because he says stuff in particular ways that I often wonder, even where I agree with him, I often wonder, why are you saying this? It's what is the point of it? What are you hoping to achieve? And I still don't have an answer. But yeah, so what he said was that something to the effect, I don't have the exact quote in front of me because I don't think it's that important, but it was something to the effect of, yeah, it would be moral for us to starve 2 million people in Gaza to death, but the world wouldn't let us do it. And of course, the anti-Israel crowd use this as they use whatever they can to say, look at these evil Jews, I mean Zionists. All they want is to starve Palestinians, and they're all evil or something. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Did I already say welcome to the? Anyway, I'm joined by Michael Kauffman. Michael, your thoughts on Smotrich's statement and the reaction to it?
Yeah, well, this is, Smotrich along with Ben Gvir and to some extent Levine, who tends to be quieter while he orchestrated the attempt to take over the Supreme Court. But Smotrich and Ben Gvir are often outspoken and in a way that is reminiscent of places like North Korea and Iran and other places that we Israel, we America never want to be associated with. It's just useless. They are also extremely religious. They are extremely right wing, and they have this belief that whatever comes out of their mouth is somehow ordained from God, and that they can just talk and with no consequences. It's all terrific if they were private citizens, and they are perfectly able to do that. But these are representatives of the Israeli government. In fact, these are the people that are supposedly the closest to Netanyahu in this government than anyone else. I agree with you, Razi, that it makes no sense why you would even make that statement, even if you thought it. And frankly, folks, the idea of putting groups of people under siege and letting them run out of water and food is nothing new. I mean, this has been going on since human beings went to war with each other, which is pretty much as mostly everyone can figure out. As soon as humans associated in groups, one group would fight the other, and as the things got bigger, they would get worse, and they would put you, if they were having a war, they would put you under siege, which is why you have castles and embankments and all kinds of things. Anyhow, but the world has decided, and I don't think this is necessarily codified in particular, and I certainly don't know the exact law, but this is not something any Western government should ever say, or a civilized government should ever say. And frankly, it's unnecessary today. What I hope he meant was that it's not our responsibility to ensure that food and water get to the civilians of the warring faction, which is different than saying we're going to starve everybody. But we can get into that nuance later. But what he said was unfortunate. I would also lastly just conclude with, obviously the world's response to this is the typical anti-Semitic baloney that we hear all the time. I mean, Hamas's constitution, such as it is, basically says from the river to the sea, and we're not going to stop until Israel's gone. Somehow that's okay under international law. They talk about genocide. I mean, this is asking for the genocide of Israel and the Jews in Israel. That's okay. Nobody submitted to the International Court of Justice this terrible joke of a tragedy of an institution. Nobody submitted that as being bad, and nobody submits anything from Iran saying that Iran has death to America, death to the infidels, etc. Nobody submits any of that. But so, you get a statement from some guy that is not even really written down per se, And this is, of course, he should be arrested for talking, which of course is absurd. So the world's response is typical. Why Israel doesn't know how to deal with this stuff and number one, prevent it, but number two, also respond to it in a way is beyond me, which we can also talk about.
Thank you, Megan, for becoming a YouTube member of Ayn Rand Center UK. All right, so I hate to defend Smotrich in any way, and I'm not really fully going to. I mean, I hate to defend him because I despise him in every way possible. I think he's wrong on pretty much everything. And I'm not going to defend this statement, and I'll say a bit more about why I have an issue with it. But I do want to say, we've brought up Operation Starvation in past episodes when the U.S. intentionally, tried to starve some of the population in Japan during World War II in order to bring an end to the war as soon as possible. And yeah, absolutely. Of course, Israel shouldn't feed its enemy during a time of war, but and leaving aside the whole idea that there are 2 million people in Gaza, which is, of course, another piece of Palestinian propaganda, you are absolutely, if you are forced into a war, you should do whatever you can to end it as quickly and as decisively as possible. So if saying to the Palestinians, look, we're gonna make sure food does arrive, but after you surrender and give us Hamas, obviously send back the hostages, but send us Hamas's leaders and send us Hamas's foot soldiers. Until then, you will suffer. That is perfectly legitimate to say to the civilian population. Again, Britain, which has also been very upset with Smotrich over this, did that in Dresden, in Hamburg, in Berlin. They bombed civilian populations. That's perfectly legitimate. Now, him saying it makes no sense while he is willingly sitting in a government that is feeding the Palestinians. You want to say something about doing things differently. First of all, argue within the government against feeding the Palestinians, and then take it from there. The fact that he is making such statements is just, I don't know if he thinks this will get him over the threshold into the next parliament, because in polls he's kind of there's a question mark there. But I don't see any benefit to it, and yeah, it's unfortunate. It does know, like, actually preventing food from getting into Gaza will do some good for Israel in terms of the war. Saying this does pure harm and nothing else. Michael.
Yeah, look, I think you don't. I mean, I don't even think you have to go as far as Israel's gone. I mean, I think you let the aid truck from other countries, not Israel, aid trucks from other countries that want to supply aid. You let them in. You protect them for the first X hundred yards or meters, and then they're on their own. And you let them into a Hamas area or a Palestinian area. By the way, these terms are generally interchangeable in real life, because even if they're not real, if they're not dressed as Hamas, and remember, Hamas dresses as civilians, they're getting money from Hamas if they're not actually Hamas sympathizers and employees, and let them deal with the food. Now, the fact is that most of the problems, to the extent they exist in Gaza, are because Hamas hoards the aid. Hamas steals the aid, it hoards the aid, and it doesn't allow its people. And there's ample photographs of Hamas soldiers and even shooting Palestinians who try to go get the aid and try to go get water and food stuff. Again, I think Israel does a miserable job of highlighting that and continuously saying, never backing down from saying, we allow these people in. This is all we're going to do. We have no other obligation. This is beyond our obligation. We do it because we're good people, even though it does aid the enemy. And by the way, the problem the Palestinian people are having now with getting food and water is the same problem they had before October 7th, which is that they are controlled by a terrorist regime who has no interest in individual rights.
Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Yeah, as you mentioned, aid does go into Gaza, and we have seen footage of, and we know we've seen footage of Hamas taking over these trucks. We've seen footage of just civilians attacking the trucks, and there was at least one incident we know where the driver was killed. We also know of in Rafah, a couple of months before the Israeli operation there. Israel killed a few local leaders in Hamas, and all of a sudden prices in the market dropped. So when the world when the world talks and the markets are overflowing, there's no shortage of anything when Hamas isn't making sure there is a shortage. So when the world is demanding of Israel that it feed its enemy that attacked it and started this war, the world is taking a side which could easily be answered and could easily be answered by saying, look, we don't want this war. We didn't start it. We would end it right now. And the other side is demanding its continuation. And we do not see among the population, the Palestinian population, the people who are supposedly not Hamas and the innocent victims, we do not see anybody standing up to their oppressors who are also our killers. So why is it that we are expected to support and feed our enemies?
Yeah, again, the ability of Israel. I mean, they could really just hire a generally good PR firm from New York or London, and do a much better job than they do it. They just seem unable or incapable of just having a basic set of statements that are rational, and they end up answering every little detailed question instead of rising above the obnoxious and generally, it's one of these. When did I stop? There's a semi joke, which is not that funny in the U.S. When did you stop beating your wife? And if you say I didn't, and you're still beating her, and if you tell them when, then you used to beat her. There's no good answer to that because the question is phrased in such a way that there's no good answer. Now, Israel doesn't seem to be able to get out of those questions. They always answer the question. They don't answer the question that the principles are sitting on. And that is, you don't hear Israel saying the war every single time that any spokesperson for Israel, army, politician, center gets up and has a public, they should say, let us start with being clear. Israel's position is the war could stop tomorrow if all of the hostages are returned and Hamas surrenders, which is generally the way wars are won. When you win a war, the other side surrenders and you get your prisoners back. That's how it goes. It's nothing novel, but Israel doesn't seem to be able to do that. We can't even enunciate that basic concept, and then so on and so forth. And we certainly haven't handled it well on the this notion of starvation, and somehow that's Israel's fault. And this is all crap created by the UN and other anti-Semitic organizations to make Israel, quote, feel bad. And by the way, these issues don't apply to any other war anywhere. Nobody's concerned about Ukrainians starving. Nobody's concerned about what happens in Sudan. Nobody's concerned about Syria. And we could go on and on and on. The African Congo and almost every other conflict in the world. Nobody talks about them. But when it's about Israel and Gaza, Israel fighting a terrorist organization, suddenly there's a whole other set of rules that have to be applied. And then we have somebody like Smotrich, adding fuel to the fire and inflaming the situation, and there's no good that can come from it, as you said, Razi.
Yeah, by the way, in Gaza, the answer to when did you stop beating your wife is how dare you accuse me of not beating my wife.
I'm not beating my wife, right? Exactly, not beating my wife.
So the whole aid in wartime again is something that I struggle with, to understand how it's even a thing, and why is it a thing in this direction? Why is it not a thing in the other direction? Why is there no international outcry that the people of Gaza provide humanitarian aid to Israel because they started a war and they slaughtered innocent civilians, and now Israelis, like we were talking a couple of days ago on the reality show about the Israeli economy really suffering, from soldiers not doing their job because they're reserve soldiers, can't go to work because they're fighting a war, from the economy, being basically the tourism industry being on pause for nearly a year, from a massive chunk of the country up north being completely paralyzed because there was a war. And yeah, why aren't we demanding that if not the people of Gaza or the people of Lebanon, then at least the people of Iran pay for humanitarian aid to Israel, which, by the way, I think is ridiculous, but slightly less ridiculous than the idea of Israel giving aid to its enemy that started a war and could end it at any time.
Well, let me just clarify what I said earlier. In case I don't believe that Israel needs to supply aid. I think that Israel should enable aid trucks to get through the crossing and get to an area where they can distribute the aid. I don't believe, and I'm with you on this, that Israel should have to, that there's any requirement at all. Again, it's not required in any other war ever, and it never has been. This is a new idea that is only thrust at the Jews and Israel, and it's unbelievable that Israel cannot answer this directly, starting with the foundational principles that we didn't start the war and the war could end tomorrow if such and such happens. And make everybody, when someone says, don't you accept responsibility for people, let's say if they're starving, then you say no. The governing body of Gaza, which is Hamas, it should accept responsibility for that, because the people wouldn't be starving if Hamas surrendered. Because what has happened in this crazy world of ours and this inability to articulate principles is that everyone kind of assumes that it's okay that Hamas perpetuates the war. Israel is not perpetuating the war. You can argue whether Israel is prolonging the war. But if Hamas came and said, we surrender and we're going to return the hostages, it would be very difficult, even for Netanyahu, to say, we're going to continue to bomb the shit out of you. The world, frankly, wouldn't tolerate it, and America wouldn't tolerate it, and most of Israel, frankly, wouldn't tolerate it. The 70% of Israel who thinks that Netanyahu needs to be gone wouldn't tolerate it. So that's what is remarkable to me, is that we get stuck in these little nuanced crap discussions instead of starting with the foundational principles of what happened and how it could be ended.
Thank you, Apollo Zeus, for gifting a YouTube membership. Yeah, I saw a headline last night, I think it was, from that Biden told Netanyahu, we have to bring back the hostages. And I'm thinking, why is this a headline? Why is he saying this? Why is he saying this to Netanyahu? What is the new part, unless Biden doesn't actually remember that he has spoken about this in the past? How is that a thing, and how is that a thing being told to Israel? And yeah, so with every aspect of this war, whether it's Palestinians not having food or medicine or whatever it is we believe that they need to have and don't, whether it's the hostages, whether it's again any aspect, whether it's attacks from the north, whether it's a potential attack from Iran, all of this is somehow blamed on Israel. And the fact is, Israel seems to, if not officially do so, seems to accept that blame, because again, it is sending aid into Gaza in greater numbers than it did before October 7th, which is quite the statement to any future terrorists. It is refusing to act decisively against Hezbollah in the north. It is sitting and waiting while Iran is saying, we are coming, we are going to attack you, and it's going to be devastating and it's going to be unprecedented. Just sitting and waiting for it to happen. And again, we know that Israel will act if a real major disaster happens, when that attack comes. We don't know when. We don't know what the nature of that attack is. And if thousands die in Israel, we know Israel is going to do something militarily. But if nobody dies or not many people die, Israel is going to be unfortunately proportionate in its response. and with proportionality with an enemy that says we want you to cease to exist, and we will make that happen when we are able to. The refusal to act is suicidal.
Well, the problem that Israel has is Netanyahu has lost pretty much all credibility with anybody, other than maybe a little bit on the right wing crazies in Israel. On the world stage, he doesn't have any real. I mean, who's really Netanyahu's advocate on the world stage? Joe Biden cannot form a sentence. We know that, and whoever the puppet masters running Washington right now, and this is a real problem. I'm not saying that just cynically. I mean, it's very clear that Biden. It was clear before he had a debate with Trump that he was demented. And I'm speaking as a physician who's used to treat some demented patients or try to treat them. He's lost and he doesn't know what he's doing. So whatever geniuses they have in Washington pulling his strings are certainly not supporting him. And a lot of the problem with the dialogue in the world and the headlines, as you asked, is because America certainly has not helped with the top line. It reminds me, and you guys know I often go back and pick on Obama because I think Barack Obama started what I would call the moral relativism of everything. There are no good countries, there are no bad countries. America is not a good country. It's not that bad, but we have a lot of problems and we're not perfect, so we should apologize. Israel is a bad country because there's some people that we took there. Israel took some land. That was Barack Obama's basic view. Iran, which wants to annihilate the West, is not that bad a country. They just have their religious views. They think we should all live in Sharia law. So, and when an ambassador from the U.S. was killed, and Barack Obama said he would bring the perpetrators to justice because they deserve a trial, just like our Constitution says for citizens of America. And what's happened now is that moral relativism, no good, no evil. Everybody's got problems. We're all in this together. Doesn't matter if you want to have 9-year-old girls get married. That's just was approved in Iraq, by the way, folks. It doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter if you have to convert everybody. We're all kind of equal. And that is the fundamental problem here, that Israel is not good and Hamas really isn't bad. That's why the pro-terrorist chants are allowed to go on in Western democracies, because this is they have a point of view. The fact that it's destruction of the West, we should condone that. We should burn all our flags and we should condone all that, because freedom of speech guarantees that you can say whatever the heck you want, which it doesn't. But that's the point that they make and go on. So I think the reason Israel cannot get it, Netanyahu is incapable of making definitive principle-based statements. His interview at Time, if you read it, was a disgrace. I mean, the article itself was so morally relativistic. You could barely tell who the good guys were and the bad guys were. But he was, other than sort of apologizing for things he didn't do before October 7th to prevent it, it was a terrible article. But you didn't find any principles of democracy, individuality, and protections in there. And you didn't even hear any cheering for Israel being the only successful democracy in the Middle East, where Arabs have way more rights in Israel than they do in almost every other country in the Middle East. So I think that's where this comes from.
Did he apologize, or did he say something to the effect of "I'm sorry that it happened," which I can also say, but I take no responsibility for it. I mean,
well, he suggested that he said we will always look back and wish we had done things differently. It was as close to an apology as Ben Netanyahu has ever done. My understanding, it was never actually translated directly into Hebrew, or never. He never said it in Hebrew. Which I found interesting. I don't know if that's true, but I wouldn't be surprised. One of the things you learn in Politics 101 in the 2000s, since 2000, is you never apologize and admit you were wrong, unless you're going to resign. But if you want to stay in power, you let the news stream run it, burn out till it gets to the next thing.
So with Netanyahu, I have to say, yeah, with every day that passes, his standing in the world, on the world stage, gets worse. but not for all the wrong reasons. Like people oppose him because they think he's actually fighting this war, which he isn't. In Israel, he seems to be doing better, and I think in part he's doing better because the world is clearly against Israel and is clearly against Netanyahu and is packaging Israel and Netanyahu together. So today there was a poll in Ma'ariv that showed that if the elections were held today, the biggest party would be Likud, which is the first time
Yeah.
since October 7th. And I think in terms of who would be a better prime minister, it was him and Gantz. I think it was 42 to 40 or 44 to 42 or something like that. So Netanyahu's support is growing, and he has mostly foreign leaders and foreign media to thank for that. I do think, as I've said, in the past couple of months, we've seen things from Israel that are better, but they're in part, we've seen better things just because of how badly the war was executed up until now, that any sort of action seems better than what we saw before. It's a very, very sad situation in Israeli politics because, yeah, Netanyahu is terrible, and when you look at the alternatives, it's terrifying. It doesn't. Who is gonna run this war better,
Yes.
or not as bad as Netanyahu?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know. You're absolutely right. I mean, the huge failure, and this is frankly, look, this started when the protests started, when the government reforms were beginning and the protests started. And I had many arguments with people that were close to me. We were in Israel, and I actually attended some of some of these protests. And jumping up and down and screaming and having great speakers for the first three weeks or 4 weeks is fine, but you got to grow up and get with a political game and do something about it after that. You can't believe, and I have to say that what appeared to me to be naivete and just kind of, what planet are you living on? You need to get a leader, a counter to Netanyahu and what would be considered centrist people in the United States, are left wing in Israel. The left wing is so splintered in Israel, and it's not because there's a bunch of progressive crazies. They don't have that to any significant extent. What they have is an inability to coalesce. The splintered left, they're all too. I always believe that they are all just too smart to agree on anything, and they can't agree on fundamentals. And so what you have is a bunch of wimpy apologists and people that like to make compromises. And that cannot counter a man like Netanyahu. You have to set a group of principles together that you're going to stand for. You have to speak strongly. And Gantz is anything but that.
yeah. Well, one thing the Israeli left has been clear on is that the soldiers accused of abusing a Hamas terrorist are guilty. And we've talked about this a few times on the channel, but now there was a video proving their guilt. Or does it? That will be the topic of the reality show, which starts in a couple of minutes. Thanks, Michael, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for watching. The Daily Objective is back tomorrow. The reality show, as I mentioned, starts in a couple of minutes. See you there.
Thanks, Razi. Bye-bye.